I am going to ask Charlie to do the poll, and the reason why we're asking these questions is just so we can get a sense about what's important to people in the room this evening. Charlie.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully a question has popped up on your screens. It's just one question on there, and it's: as a carer or close contact of someone in a care home, please choose one of the following which is of greatest concern or interest to you at the moment. And the 5 options we have are general visiting procedures, taking your relatives on outings from the care home, procedures and/or opportunities to be an essential caregiver, length or privacy of visits, and the last one is something else. And if you do click that, please put your answer, if you're able to, in the chat box. Thank you. So we've got 7 completed polls at the moment. There's 33 of us on the call.
How are we doing, Charlie?
Still only 7 responses. Hopefully we'll get a couple more in a second. Give it another 10, 15 seconds.
Charlie, it's disappeared off the screen. Well, it's disappeared off my screen.
Yes, mine too.
And mine as well, within a second.
Oh, blimey. Okay. Let me try this. Has it popped up again?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Try again.
It was just one question, is that right? And then it just.
That's correct, yeah. That's better. They're flying in now.
Good. And give me a bit of an idea now, Charlie, what the issue is.
Okay, so we've got 18 responses so far. 60% are about general visiting procedures. 20% about procedures or opportunities to be an essential caregiver, and there's an even spread really between taking your relatives out and something else, that hopefully is a couple in the chat box. And there's been no votes for length or privacy of visits. Okay, so we've got 55% of us have completed it. Give it another 10 seconds. And then what I'll do is I'll take a quick screenshot afterwards and I will send it around after, so everyone has a record of that.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I'm going to move on to sort of say to you that what we're going to do now is we're going to hear from. Are you going to put it in the chat box? Did you say, Charlie?
The results, yeah, the results should have just popped up on the screen.
Okay.
I don't know if it shows for you, Sonia, because you're down as a co-host, but I'm going to email it over to you anyway, just so you can have a quick look.
If you could put it in the chat box for me, because then I don't have to read an email as well. If that's all right, that would be really, really good. But the top one at the moment is the visiting procedures. Is that right, Charlie?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to hear first of all from Les, Leslie Meach, and then from Philippa Russell, and then from Trevor Greenidge, and it's quite interesting. I'm going to start off with you, Les, in that general visiting procedures is coming up as the top issue. And I know from talking to you that one of the things for you is that you've had generally a positive experience, which we're all so delighted to hear, really, that for you it's actually been a very positive experience. So we just share that for us,
Yes.
Les.
Absolutely. As soon as the second sort of lockdown had closed, if you like, when they started to reopen again, the manager of the care home that my mother was in, when I spoke to her on the phone to arrange a visit, was actually there when I came to visit and said to me, right, have you heard about essential carers? I said, yes, I have. And she said, well, we think you will be an absolute perfect candidate. My mum is bedbound. She doesn't mix with anybody else. She needs help with everything, eating, washing, absolutely everything. She then said to me, as an essential carer, we don't expect you to do our work for us, but if you would like to actively participate, you decide what you want to do, or if you would just like to come and visit. What it necessitates, though, is we will put you on our staff list for regular LFTs and PCRs. So I have to do a minimum of 2 LFTs a week and 1 PCR a week. I basically can go in at any time. I always ring first to make sure there's not a problem in the care home. I actually do participate in mummy's care in that I feed her a minimum of twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week, which has been fantastic because she has really struggled to reconnect with me on the second time after the lockdown. And by actually being there, feeding her, talking to her, and I use a visor rather than a mask so she can see my face. Yes, I wear gloves and an apron when I'm actually giving her care, but if I pop in on a Saturday morning or on my way to or from court or anything I'm tied up with, all they ask is that I wear a mask. So that's really my visor, and I see her. And yes, my experience, I know, speaking to a lot of other people in different parts of my life, my experience is sadly fairly unusual. The majority of people have really struggled. So I can only say how grateful I am every day for the fact that I have been included so hugely within the care home. And I do think that CQC need to look, when they're doing the assessments in the future, when they start talking about responsiveness, inclusiveness, caring, that sort of thing, this is an area that they need to look at, is how visiting's been dealt with. And now I'll be quiet because I know I'm one of the lucky ones.
Les, thank you so much, because it always makes me smile inside and out every time I hear a positive story. Philippa, I know that you, like me, won't be surprised that still the top issue is the general visiting guidelines, but doesn't it make you feel a bit sick to the stomach, really, that we're still sort of like thinking about what the general visiting guidelines and some of those issues? I know, Philippa, that one of the things that you've done, not just as an unpaid carer, but also as an advocate for carers with Carers UK and on various groups in terms of the government, have really continued to bang the drum about this. I mean, is there anything that you wanted to add from that?
Well, firstly, I was absolutely delighted to hear Leslie's story, because I
Yes.
think we've got to tell. Oh, am I? No, I'm not mute. We have got to tell the good stories. We are really on the edge of some very big changes. There's a lot of talk about social care reform. We know that some of the issues, maybe around paying for care, will be resolved. But as carers always say, and we hear this constantly in Carers UK, it's not so much what you pay and how you pay, it's the quality of the care that's provided. And we ought to be talking about that quality and what actually works. Reference has been made to Ed Balls's programs. There are 2 actually. There's another one next week. And I think anybody who watched that program would be reminded that when we talk about care, we need to be celebrating, supporting, encouraging shared care. Because when my husband was in a nursing home, my son is in supported living, it's the quality of the relationships between the unpaid carers and the paid carers, and above all else, the person who is living the life that both are supporting. And I think we have to have some cautious optimism. There is a white paper coming out before Christmas on social care reform. Now, white paper, for those of you not familiar with them, is a government document that comes out before legislation or action change. So watch out for it. There's been a lot of discussion in government about paying for care, the £86,000 cap, which is supposed to be the maximum any of us would pay. But for me, although it's important to talk about care, and I paid a great deal for care, I sold my house, which I'm sad about, but I don't regret because it brought good care. But I think all of us need to be part of the journey in actually celebrating, I've been using that word again, what good care looks like, what a good social care workforce looks like, because we know there are huge problems at the moment in many care homes in recruiting and retaining staff. And we need to value our staff. And I'm very struck, having my final comment, having lived in other European countries, how there they seem to have attributed much more value to the role of the carer, paid or unpaid, in supporting very vulnerable people to have good lives. But I would really ask you, actually, at the end of this, any of you who are carers, if you have got any good stories, please could you send them to Sonia, who could pass them on to me. They'll have your address, Sonia, because as the white paper develops, I and others are trying to provide stories, evidence of what good looks like. Now, good visiting arrangements, some creative relationships in care homes really matter, but they're part of a bigger agenda, aren't they? They're about mutual trust, mutual respect, and a willingness to actually be the family around somebody who is living a life which still has possibilities, which hopefully they can enjoy, but where there still are so many threats around, because COVID hasn't gone away. We know that we're going to have a flu epidemic, and we need to be sure that we manage that safety with actually giving people a life they can still enjoy. So thank you for this meeting. I think it's really important. But please, if anybody has good stories, and actually I don't only mean unpaid carers when I think about it, please can you share them? Because now is the time to move away from just thinking how we pay for care to understanding and promoting what we mean by good care, by co-production, by good lives for the people we support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Philippa. And it's always so good to remind us about those positive stories. Trevor, we met yesterday, and Trevor is Trevor Greenidge from the Relatives and Residents Association. And I'm sure, Trevor, when you finish, you'll put your contact details in the chat box for any carers who may want to contact. And you refer to it sometimes, Trevor, because I know you work on the helpline. You said to me yesterday, it's almost like a tsunami sometimes of calls from relatives who are in real pain, and real discomfort and horror at where they are with regards to not being able to visit their care for, and I'm sure it isn't a surprise to you that that's still the top issue, is understanding those visiting guidelines. So just wondered if you want to give us a bit of a view from your organisation's perspective.
Okay, thanks for having me. Yes, from our perspective, it's been a long, slow journey to where we are now. A long, slow and painful journey for the people that contact us, for relatives, families and friends. Initially, there was, of course, a lot of anxiety, a lot of heartache, a lot of fear for residents, and a lot of admiration and gratitude to care staff for the work that they were doing. A lot. Balanced. But I fear, because we are where we still are, and the slow progress that we're having, there is progress, but the slow progress, I fear that sentiment from family and friends is becoming toxic, to the point where their anxiety, their frustration of being blocked in visiting their relatives is having a negative effect on that really important relationship that Philippa mentioned between care home staff and residents, to provide that, to become that team, to provide that quality of care for residents. It's not just the physical care that is needed, it's the emotional and psychological care that is also equally as important. And so, yes, as you know, I've heard, to balance it, I've heard of success stories such as Leslie's before, and they are sorely welcomed, because they prove that with a bit of thought and communication, these challenges can be overcome. Just thinking out of the box, thinking person-centered thinking, individual thinking. These challenges, which the sector is going through and are going to get worse, in my opinion, can be overcome. So yeah, I'd like to think that there's going to be a positive at the end. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, but at the moment, yes, I'm still hearing from a lot of residents that are struggling to keep their emotions in check. When they let their emotions reign free, care staffs and care providers that are suddenly also under the microscope from government for another reason are closing down. We're afraid of these closed cultures.
Right, thanks very much for that, Trevor. And I'm going to bring Kate in a minute to talk about those closed cultures, actually. But you know, I'm interested because I know that you get so many calls on the helpline, and people ring a helpline because they've got a problem, don't they? But I wanted to sort of remind people that Kim, which I'll ask to say something after Kate. Rogers from the Care Quality Commission has just put in the contact details in the chat box. Remember that there is a regulator, but before we go into that and before we go to Kate, I just wanted to either go to Rosemary or Michael. I think I've got that right. Michael, thank you. Because we've got east and west, haven't we? I think, but you were part of a care home providers network, aren't you, Michael? Where people come together, is that right? And sort of talk about some of these issues. And what I want to say is, you know, all of us, and I don't know if anybody's seen these green hearts in terms of social care, to remember that actually our social care providers have been through a lot in the last couple of years, and it is a very, very difficult circumstance that we're all navigating, including you guys. So I wanted to sort of bring you in, Michael, at this point, because it's not about saying that you guys are doing anything wrong. It's about sort of thinking about it in terms of the wider system. So Michael, could you sort of think about it from reflecting from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the important thing to point out, so I'm chair of the Registered Care Association for East Sussex, Brighton Hove and Rosemary is my counterpart for the West Sussex Association. So it's a trade association, and between us we represent about 400 care homes across East and West Sussex. So we talk to I'm also a provider of learning disability services. I've got 2 care homes that my family own and operate with a management team. So we're very much on the front line and understand the frustrations from both sides. And we'd really like not to have to work under the current restrictions that we're working under. It's very, very frustrating, especially as vaccination levels are very high in care services. Almost all of our staff now are vaccinated. And so the lack of easing of some of the restrictions is quite beyond us, especially as almost everybody's relatives are also double vaccinated and have often had a booster as well. So it's very frustrating for us as well, because the current arrangements are difficult to make work sensibly, they're time consuming, and they place undue restrictions in our opinion. And it's a shame that that hasn't been revisited more quickly, and a source of some frustration, which we've fed back obviously to the Department of Health and Social Care. But hopefully, looking ahead, things certainly on the visiting side are going to get easier. I guess big picture stuff is stuff that you guys all know about already, that we're working under a huge amount of pressure. That pressure is worsening dramatically at the moment as we enter winter. Winter for us started at the end of August with staff pressures. And it's got harder and harder and harder over the past 6-8 weeks, which my colleagues are feeling in a really big way now. So recruitment is extremely challenging. We've got senior managers now working as on the floor, covering shifts on a regular basis, which puts a bit more pressure on as well. And the next 2 or 3 months are going to be quite a tough time. So that message out to all of the people that sort of work around care homes and support us, we are really strongly in favour of essential caregivers. They really help our staff teams. So the more of you that are able to step in and help out with that sort of thing, the better, I think. That's a really positive thing. With any large group of independent providers, you're going to get really great services and ones that struggle a little bit more. I would hope that the vast majority of care homes have been good at communicating the issues to the relatives of people living in those services and work really closely with families to try and resolve some of those issues where they arise. That's what we would expect and what we've consistently supported our members to do. So there should be no one that's not able to visit their relatives in some way, shape or form on a regular basis. And if people are having those problems, then we'd be happy to try and help resolve those issues with our colleagues in the local authority and at the CQC as well. And that I hear less and less of that sort of thing now. I'm hopeful that that's still not really significantly an issue. A bit harder in the cold weather, because some of those options for outside visiting are a little bit harder for people to sort of cope with. But we're working really, really hard to try and make this work for everybody.
Thank you for that, Michael. And you did answer partly one of the questions that came up in the chat box there, which is, if some can do this, why can't others? And Kim, when we get to your bit, maybe you could think about looking at trying to think about what the answer to that is, really. But before we get to Kim, Kate, you are going to talk about care behind closed doors, and as well as being an engagement officer for Healthwatch East Sussex, Kate, you also yourself are an unpaid carer, aren't you, with direct experience, and I know you talk with passion about that previously. So do share with us what you wanted to.
Hello everybody, thank you. I worked for Healthwatch East Sussex, engagement officer, but for 20 years I was caring for my mum, who had to go into residential care in the end of June this year because her community care package couldn't be sustained due to staff shortages. Otherwise I would have to leave my job. So it was a bit of a shock to do that. And I've been reflecting over quite some time over these things about the horrible challenges that we are all facing, really, and the key points of that is particularly the challenge of closed doors to communication and practical care, and trying to address those challenges come on top of the fact that the last 18 months has challenged every single citizen with the huge culture shock. We've had to understand new and frequent changes of rules, law, guidance, and what's the difference between them anyway. Inconsistency, because there'll be some people here who, as we know, have difficult visiting experiences, and others have ones that are good. We've never before had so many sources of information and so many versions of the truth. And really this has, I think, and this is just me talking, this has laid bare our underlying relationship with authority. And this brings issues of trust. Do we trust it? Do we comply? Do we disobey? Do we argue with it? Do we try and bend the rules? How do we express ourselves? And we bring all that. Particularly, I found myself thinking, I've got to think about my relationship with our care home. You know, my mum's care and all our well-being depends on this relationship. So trying to find a way to make that work. Because at the same time, I'm a former nurse, I've got a background in health and care and advice work. I am very aware of the pressure, the huge pressure on staff and providers. Staff and providers have got pressure to forego communication elements of a care plan. Face-to-face visiting, it used to be seen as, you know, really essential, and thankfully essential carers can. But phone calls, regular visiting, all these things, where's that? The communication of part of the care plan has been knocked sideways over the last 18 months, and the impact on the vulnerable person, the person in residential or inpatient setting. And there's the pressure on staff to provide those technical alternatives at a time when they've also lost that extra pair of hands. As Mike was saying, relatives and carers who would go in to do that. And so staff have lost those essential, those complementary extras that assist the well-being. And those barriers of giving or receiving information about the patient and resident, which is so valuable to staff to be able to do that, and it's not so easy for them to get that. So with this mishmash in my mind, the transfer to the care home, it was a culture shock. There are new rules. How do I remember everything? Now you talk about it, I think I do remember something about being told essential carer, but that was at a time when I was thinking, how on earth will my princess of a mother manage in a care home? And that was, I thought she wouldn't be able to cope. I didn't feel in control, but I retain a huge sense of responsibility for her well-being. Is the care good enough? What does that mean? I'm pleased to say, I'm relieved to say, her hair looks great. She's got her teeth, she doesn't smell, she appears relaxed and she's comfortable. And you know, there are so many things of extra stuff that she would prefer and I would prefer. But for me, I feel it's good enough and I can take her out to the park in the wheelchair. So I've had to relax quite a few things really about, you know, some niceties that make me wince a little bit. But at the same time, I really worry about phoning up and bothering the staff about something. I don't want to make a fuss. So with that in mind, just trying, I remember, you know, that we have to, or myself, I felt a responsibility to bring my best self to every conversation, and that hopefully staff and providers can also bring their best selves to the conversation. And that sometimes can mean when we're under pressure, we have a different tone, and sometimes it can feel a bit combative either way. And maybe on both sides, we need to just try and remember that we should be bringing our best selves to the conversation, but we don't always manage it because we've got all those backstories, all those tensions going on behind. And that's where I'm leaving it, really. Thank you.
Thank you. I myself feel quite emotional after that, but thank you so much, Kate, for that. And as Kate was talking, Trevor, one of the things that you have put in the chat box is the link to the Relative and Residents Association, and the guidance, because it resonates, does it not, probably across the call, and Michael himself referred to it, but it can be intensely frustrating. And I think there was a point at which things were happening so quickly as that actually it was dizzying at various points, and then it seems to have stopped. It seems to have come to a static point, really. But I thank you so much for that, Kate. Kim, I did say wherever you are, I can't see you. I thought you were there. Aha, Kim, I know that all of this, you guys at the Care Quality Commission have heard this plus. And I suppose the thing for all of us is around, if there is something that we're concerned about, what can we do? What are our options? But also, where are we at now? What do you see happening really in the coming months? Do you foresee any changes? Thank you, Kim.
Well, we do recognise the pressure, as Mike was saying, that providers are under, and we've reported on this recently in our State of Care report. And at the same time, visits from family and friends are vital for the health and well-being of people living in care homes, and it would be unjustifiably detrimental to residents to deprive them of contact with their loved ones or care from their loved ones. So I did post in the chat about we are looking at infection prevention and control at every single care home inspection, and part of that covers visiting that we check and we report on. So if anyone's got any concerns about that, please do get in contact and let us know, because we will always follow that up. As part of our new regulatory framework, we're developing quality statements. So on visiting, we're hearing a lot about visiting, and we're taking it very seriously and taking it forward. So there'll be a quality statement that we check on visiting and contact with loved ones at every inspection going forward into our new regulatory framework next year. We're also recommending to the Department of Health and Social Care that there's a change to Regulation 9 to include visiting. Just like it includes person-centred care, food preferences, all sorts of other things, that it's put into legislation. Now, that's not going to be a quick fix. It's going to take 2 to 3 years. It'll be a change to Regulation 9, but it's based on the recommendation from the Joint Committee of Human Rights that came out this May. So we are taking it very seriously. I would really advise anyone to raise any issues with visiting to us so that we can follow it up. And just on the consistency issue, which is really important and really interesting, we know in Sussex we've got a higher level of inadequate and requires improvement rated services and less good and outstanding. We've got a high number of individual providers. For example, the provider might be the registered manager. They might not have that big network of an HR department, for example, and the support. We've got some deprived areas, some coastal towns, hard to reach rural communities. We've got a higher ageing population in Sussex as well. Got competition of hospitality, retail, tourism, impact of Brexit and COVID, and people going back to Gatwick Airport, for example. But Sussex isn't alone in those challenges and struggles. The great thing is the Sussex local authorities and CCGs are very supportive and proactive, and they've moved into support providers throughout the pandemic and continue to do so. So that's good news. But I would really advise anyone to get in touch with us about any concerns that they've got about visiting, so that we can follow them up.
Thank you so much, Kim. And you know, for a moment there, I thought you were painting a fairly bleak picture of Sussex in terms of some of the issues. And I suppose we've got to remember we live in a beautiful part of the world. It's not as beautiful as Cumbria, just saying. But we live in a beautiful part of the world, and there is a lot of tremendous effort to be working in terms of social care workforce and trying to encourage people to choose social care as an occupation. I'm just wondering whether I'm going to pick up a couple of the points in the chat box in a minute, but I'm just wondering whether there's anybody on the call, because I can't see any of the names that Kate very nicely provided for me. But is there anybody on the call that can talk particularly about one of the issues that's been coming up in the media a number of times, which is workforce and vaccinations, and whether that is something that we've got positivity around Sussex? Maybe we are an area that's got less people that have walked away from us as a result of not being vaccinated or not. Isabel, thank you. Isabel, do you want to say who you are?
Sorry, I'm just unmuting. I'm doing this on, I'm not used to Zoom, I'm used to Teams. Hi, I'm Isabel Warren. I'm one of the Joint Commissioners. I work across East Sussex, both health and social care. And I've been working on the care homes agenda for the last 18 months. And I just want to add to the comments about, I just want to sort of say, I just think we need to pay a huge thank you to our care home workers and the managers and the really difficult circumstances they have been working under over the last 18 months. You talked about, you had a very dizzying number of regulations, and at one point in East Sussex, I'm sure the other areas were doing the same. We were having what we call our huddles, where we were meeting with our care home managers on a weekly basis, and each week the regulations were changing. It was incredibly difficult to keep up to speed with those regulations, and so no wonder there was confusion and difficulty, because it was so difficult. And I think Mike alluded to this, but we're now at a point where, as you say, the regulations around visiting have stayed static for the care home sector and actually are being relaxed for other sectors. So again, it's a difficult one where you might be, it's maybe much more easy now to go and have a face-to-face meeting with your GP. I know that's a big debate, but the regulations have been relaxed, whereas they haven't necessarily been relaxed as far as care homes are concerned. So just very quickly on the vaccination side of things, clearly the vaccination programme has, well, we've been vaccinating staff and residents since January. And lots and lots of frustration, confusion, vaccine hesitancy, lots of conspiracy theories, misinformation circulating, which have muddied the waters. And I say, I think we've been working very hard with our care home managers, our public health colleagues in particular, have been working to the point where we have a GP in East Sussex, Dr. Thomas, who unfortunately wasn't able to join the call today, but has joined, and many of the people on this call will know him, and where a lot of really good work has been working with homes, focusing on those concerns around why people are reluctant to be vaccinated. And we have now reached a point where we have a pretty good in the high 90s percent of care home staff that have been vaccinated. As far as the booster, I see the booster campaign, and I'm not sure that anyone, the situation as far as residents are concerned across the whole of Sussex, it's standing at the moment at around 65%. The Department of Health did put a target of wanting sort of in the high 90s for residents by the 1st of November, but logistically that hasn't quite happened yet. But we've been assured that by the 12th of November, again, virtually everybody who's eligible for a booster will have, and there'll only be a few homes that haven't been visited for their booster jabs. And that's mainly because the individual, there might have been an outbreak or an infection and the home was closed when the second dose was due. So that's sort of knocked things back a little bit. So yeah, so there's been a lot of work, and we are seeing individuals, and Mike on the call, we're in a much better, or Rosemary, a much better position to tell us the details of this. There are some staff who are going to be leaving, which is a frustration, but they are determined that they're not going to have vaccinations. But on the whole now, I think we're finding that the majority of staff have been vaccinated. That's not to say that the sector can ill afford to lose any staff, but we will see. I think it's also interesting today that we've now had confirmation that health staff and social care staff will be mandated to have the vaccines as well, but not until probably March of next year. So that may level the playing field a little bit. So sorry, I've rambled on a bit, but hopefully that's kind of given you a sort of a bit of an update on some of those things.
I think that was really interesting to hear, Isabel, and you know, I think we should be rightly proud of the fact that we're talking about the high 90s in terms of 90% of our care or our social care workforce have actually agreed to that vaccination. That's really good. It's really good. And I know it's been a concern across the sector, because without that workforce, we can't actually run many of these services, which I think is the point that, Michael, you have made as well. I mean, we actually do need that workforce. I notice you've taken yourself off mute, Michael. Did you want to add something there?
Yeah, just probably to highlight the where we're at. I think the vast majority of people think that the support vaccination for all staff working with vulnerable adults it is common sense, isn't it? There's no doubt about that. The two big issues that we've been wrestling with are the timing of it. It's been introduced in the middle of winter at reasonably short notice. The health service have got until next April. We're having to wrestle with this in the middle of November. And unfortunately, it's come at a time when we already have over 100,000 vacancies in the care sector. And this is likely to result in a further 60,000 people having to leave the care sector. And a fair proportion of those 60,000 people are people that will have worked their socks off over the past year and a half, 2 years. And so it's, I think, not particularly risk-based, which is a frustration for us. There's an awful lot of other safeguards around testing and PPE use. And as I say, the timing of it is really unfortunate. So my personal feeling is it would have been better to introduce this for new starters coming in over the next 18 months and to give us a bit more time to adjust, especially as vaccination rates are so high. In Sussex, I think, or in East Sussex at the moment, I think we have around 550, 560 staff who've not yet had their first vaccination. So they're likely to be leaving this week or in the run up to Christmas, which is going to obviously exacerbate the very, very difficult staffing situation that we've got. There are a microscopic number of people who've been exempted formally. There's a national exemption application process that you have to go through now, and it's a few hundred people out of a workforce of over 1.1 million who've been exempted for medical reasons. So it's a very, very small number that are able to go through that process. So yeah, it's another challenge, and I think it's a challenge at a really, really difficult time of year. So although 94% or 95% sounds amazing, and it is, for us, that's adding to our existing staff vacancies at a time when it's really, really tough already to recruit people.
Michael, thank you for that, and thank you also, Isabel. I'm going to take a few things from the chat box just now, and Kate, I don't know whether you can help me out with this, but I can't see anybody's name on the thing here. Maybe Melanie from Public Health. Have I got somebody from Public Health here? If you're from Public Health, so aha, Ross, hello. And so just to say, Ross, you're from Public Health East Sussex, aren't you? And so Ross, I'm going to ask you a few questions if I can, really, because partly with regards to the guidelines, Public Health has had a big role to play. And I remember having this whole discussion around dynamic risk assessments. Dynamic always sounds like such a positive word, doesn't it? But having a creation of a flexible risk assessment based on that particular home. And yet, you know, we still got lots of examples. I don't know if you've been having a look in the chat box. You know, we've got Terry who talks there about, you know, having a real strong connection with a friend. That friend eventually moved to Romford because that was closer to a relative. But then, you know, he got there and after a 2.5-hour journey was all told he could only see her for an hour. He had to explain himself. And you sort of think within there, where's the risk really? And then you sort of have lots of other issues around that. You know, if one care home can do it, why can't another? Some of this sometimes doesn't make sense. Is it really what the guidance says? My mother was in a care home in Bucks where we could only visit to talk through a window for 30 minutes on an intercom. She has dementia. You know, there's a lot of that. I mean, Trevor gets this all the time on the call. What can you sort of help us with? Are things going to get better in Sussex?
No, first and foremost, I guess I'm Ross from Public Health in East Sussex. I guess there are some other colleagues representing local authorities and public health teams here. So I will not speak on their behalf. I will speak, I guess, in line with the national guidance, in line with the best evidence and best guidance that we are able to work with, and that is out there today. I guess, firstly, I think it would be improper for me not to acknowledge the success and sharing of these events over the last year. And I think it's really important. And thank you very much for welcoming us all and getting all these partners together, particularly residents, as well as the CQC and the care providers themselves. I guess from a public health perspective, I guess the public health and healthcare system is, of course, varied and I guess, to use that word, complex. I come here from a local authority public health team, and we are trying to support the local systems to implement what is national guidance. And of course, a phrase I've used repeatedly is that we encourage our care homes to work within the situation and circumstance in which they find themselves in partnership with residents' best wishes and their families. So I guess the example I'll use, and Isabel talked about the care home huddles, and I have been lucky enough to be part of that process over the last 18 months. And I guess the phrase I've used repeatedly is it would be wrong for us to try and provide a one-size-fits-all approach to every setting. And I'll give you some examples. Some of you might be familiar with care settings that are maybe converted residential settings or converted holiday settings. So they might be more residential in nature than maybe, say, a large purpose-built facility. Some of those things lend themselves to easier infection control measures, and the care staff are also dealing with whether they've got an outbreak, whether they've got staff sicknesses. If there's been an outbreak in another type of setting, like a school, what does that mean for the families that might be working? So it has to be dynamic, and I know that people may not like that word, but I think it's correct that we do allow care homes to respond to the situation that they find themselves in. And we do have to bear in mind there is much throughout this period that has been unknown. The Alpha variant came along, and that did cause some specific geographical challenges. It emerged in Kent, and those of us closer to Kent had to respond accordingly. So that it had to be dynamic. One size doesn't fit all in this, but there does have to, of course, be a framework in which everybody can work from. And I think that's what we've got to. We've got a piece of national guidance which has really been clear that care homes should be facilitating visits. We know the importance of visits on the health and welfare of residents. But at the same time, it needs to be flexible and understand to the constant pressures that providers have worked on throughout this period, and acknowledges, you know, they have got shortages. They are having to consider, you know, managing a virus in the most difficult circumstances with the most vulnerable of society quite often. So that it has to be dynamic, and I appreciate that might be difficult. And I'm not going to say that it is easy, and I'm not going to pretend that this winter is going to be easy either. I think that kind of the way I've always tried to say this is that we have to collaborate and communicate as organisations with statutory responsibilities, whether that be public health, directors of adult social care, and officers below them. The NHS, care homes have responsibilities themselves, as well as kind of the moral, I think, responsibility to communicate and collaborate with residents and their families. So I think that kind of we are where we are. The SPI-M modelling is the sort of the government advisory group that are saying what could come. I think most people, the SPI-M modelling is suggesting that this winter won't be like last year, but that is still very much unknown. We don't know we don't know what's going to happen with the waning, is the phrase that's used, of the effectiveness of the vaccine. That is still unknown at this time. Hopefully it won't cause too much. We don't know also the impact of human behaviour, but best guesses are the hospitalisation is not going to be as it was last winter. But I think that kind of it's right to approach with caution. That's what the guidance does. I have always, and I know colleagues across Sussex and across all organisations, as Trevor has also alluded to today, I think there is space for discussion, communication and interpretation of that guidance, and to try and come to some kind of collaborative solution which works for the challenges that providers are under, as well as the difficulties that maybe residents and families and carers are experiencing getting access they want. It is difficult, and it should be taken on a case-by-case basis. Hopefully that wasn't too waffly, but I think I've tried to illustrate that it is a dynamics and often complex weighing up of the risks here to try and find the best solution for all. I'm conscious that other colleagues from other public health teams might
that wasn't waffly at all. And just tell me who the other colleague is. Thank you very much, Ross. And I'm going to
probably give you away. We've seen Vicky from
Vicky, where are you from?
I work for Brighton and Hove City Council, so I work with Nicola, but Nicola's had to go, unfortunately, so I can step in. And I think
Can I just ask you a couple of questions, Vicky? Because we've heard from Ross, and I think that some of the things. So in the chat box, one of the things that one of the questions has put is, how do we define reasonable? You know, so like, you know, what is a reasonable length of a visit? And the other bit of it is Ross has talked very eloquently there. Talking our language, we want that. It's absolutely correct. You didn't waffle at all, actually, Ross. But when we hear from carers and relatives, they want to be included. They want to work in partnership. They want that communication and the collaboration. But what we don't always hear is that happens. And so it's not, you know, as specific almost as going to the regulator, but there must be something else somewhere we say, you know, it's not quite working in partnership because they're not taking what we're saying as relatives into account. And so what can they do to make that happen? Because no relative wants to be bashing on people's doors, because there is always that anxiety that that's going to have consequences, you know, in whatever way. What they want to do is work with, but what happens in those homes that aren't working with, that aren't doing all the wonderful things that Ross just said in terms of collaborative working and communicating. I'm so sorry, Vicky. You're going to say to me that it's wonderful in Brighton and Hove.
It is wonderful in Brighton and Hove.
but how? What can they do? What can somebody do who isn't getting that collaboration?
Okay. Well, I think it's a really good question, and I think one of the only answer I can really give is that those who are not working in collaboration may well be homes that have not been in contact with us and are not working with the system already. Now, in terms of how we work across Brighton, and like everywhere really with the care homes, we've had contact throughout the pandemic with most of our care homes, I would say, certainly in one form or another, either directly through supporting them with outbreak management or through communications or through the care home managers forums that are held every month or 6 weeks routinely, hosted by Adult Social Care in Brighton Hove. So there are always ways of communicating with them. But I mean, certainly whenever, all I can speak is from our experience, and also I've got Anne here, Anne Smith, who works with me in the public health team as well with infection control and outbreak management with care homes and everything, and prevention work. And so I think whenever we have communications with a home about anything to do with COVID, we will always take it. It's a bit of a making every contact count moment, really. You're kind of taking opportunities to address other issues with them at the same time as just the outbreak. So looking at kind of, obviously infection prevention control methods, what they're doing, what they may be doing that could need some support to do a bit better. All of these kind of things, talking about vaccination, we kind of offer to speak to staff about vaccination if they're hesitant. Sometimes talking to somebody outside of the organisation is helpful for people, that kind of example. If I could just go to what you said, what is reasonable in terms of visiting policy, again, I kind of have to hark back to what Ross was saying about it's really very context dependent on the setting. So if you've got a very big care home and you've got lots of residents and you've got lots of relatives who want to come and see them, and yet you have to also think about distancing and keeping safe infection control practices, you have to have a way of limiting numbers of people there at the same time, don't you really? So if you've got a massive space and hardly any people, you could have more visitors there for a longer period of time. And so the more converse that gets, the more you have to think about it. But so reasonable, again, is very much how long's a piece of string, I think. And will depend on staffing levels as well, what their business continuity is currently. If they're very short on staff, they may not be able to support too many visitors. So, I mean, that's sort of one, again, I think I've sort of rambled on a little bit, but yeah, I mean, any other questions? Or if Anne, if you want to come in on anything.
Hello, I'm Anne Smith. I'm clinical lead for infection prevention control at Brighton Hove. And
great, Anne. Great. Thank you. I don't not letting anybody get away with just. No, thanks for that very much, Vicky. And I really do not win. I don't think anybody on the call is worrying at all about anything necessarily being succinct, because we understand that this is movable. And one of the things I'm keen on hearing is can people contact public health? And if they can we make sure that goes into the chat box? Because I'm sure if people have got individual stories, then that would be helpful. And if you could sort of like add anything, any of you from the other areas that aren't here, that would be really helpful. And it's interesting. It's just like goes back to some of the stuff about the essential carer, if you know very much about this. But one of the things in the chat box just now is that somebody who asked to be an essential carer, and she can see it's Kate, but not Kate that was talking before. It's Kate Evans. She just says, I'm a nurse, and I've asked, and I can see that they're short-staffed. And is there anything at all from an infection control perspective or from a public health perspective that you can do to help people to to sort of have that discourse with care homes around essential carer?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I wanted to just kind of come on to the back of what Vicky was saying, and certainly in Brighton and Hove, when the guidance was changing all the time, we proactively were being contacted by family members who were struggling to get in to visit care homes, and quite often we could be the mediator between the care home and the between the resident and the care, the relative, and often it wasn't about identifying who was what, it was about having a different kind of conversation. And certainly when we talk to homes that are having outbreaks, we are reminding them that they do have a role around essential caregivers. Infection control is everybody's business. It's us, it's you, me, it's everybody's. It's not a specialist. It's all about understanding what the guidance says and following the guidance and really kind of following it appropriately. And we do lots of following up with care settings, and I've had lots of conversations with our care homes and just say about, actually, you need to not be telling your relatives what you're doing, but telling them with your relatives. So it becomes an us. This is what we're facing at the minute. This is the decision that we think we need to make, because this is what we're trying to do to protect others, as opposed to, I'm shutting my door, you're not coming in. It's the difference. It's the same principles. It's the different conversations. As far as I'm aware, the guidance is there for care homes. And so having an essential caregiver isn't an option. From my reading of the guidance, it's an expectation. And so therefore, it would be interesting to know how they're declining that, because I didn't think it was up to the homes to decline, is my understanding of reading the guidance. And please, anybody that's read it differently to me, let me know. But they, certainly, I was really pleased to see that essential caregiver within the guidance. I can remember this a year ago when we were trying to kind of get visiting, and from a public health perspective, we were really actively supporting it, and certainly in Brighton and Hove. So I don't understand how it was declined.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to ask Trevor to pick some of that up in a minute with regards to the essential caregiver. He's looking at me like, oh really, Sonia? But before I do that, there was another question, and well, I've got you, because it's because there was another question, which was, do you foresee, or Ross or Vicky, do you foresee that there's going to be a point in all of this? Plan B, C, D, or whatever. But there's going to be a point to this where visitors are going to have to identify what their vaccination status is, because you're absolutely right, Anne, where everybody's got a responsibility. And given that I schlepped on the train to a meeting in Brighton today, and was wanting to go down the train saying everybody's got a responsibility, you know what I'm saying? You're absolutely right, everybody's got a responsibility. But is there something, because I think at some point some carers were expecting that. They were expecting to be asked their vaccination status. Ross, you have your hand up. You are rescuing all your colleagues.
No, I'm going to put my neck on the line here, and I think just from a practical point of view, we're already asking visitors and care homes to test on arrival, and don and doff PPE effectively where relevant, and do a range of other things. I think also, though we know the vaccine is contributing to a reduction of onward transmission and community prevalence of the virus, which is of course a good thing, and I'm going to sit here and encourage everybody to get their vaccine and their booster. Sorry, I'll get it in. But there's also something here for me around let's be honest, we're trying to prevent coronavirus from entering the home, and the vaccination program does contribute to that, but it's not the sort of the kingmaker or the only intervention. It's not the thing that's going to shut the door. There's multiple things that we're doing. It's that we need multiple levels of protection, and the vaccine is maybe further at the beginning of that process, before you make the decision to have the test to go through the care home's door. And I think that kind of, we've already heard how hard pressed our care homes are in facilitating these visits, you know, asking them to sort of check and log and, you know, kind of giving reassurance of, or kind of checking or policing visitors' vaccine uptake, I think is something we've not got to. Of course, we're relying on people to do everything they can and their moral and best interests, I think, to get tested, isolate if they feel ill, not come to the care home if there's any sort of risk that they're potentially bring it in, do a lateral flow test on arrival or before, and then follow all the other control measures that we're doing to try and prevent the virus getting in. So I would be surprised if we see another tick box or policing or formal piece of, you have to have a vaccine to get in. I would be surprised if we got, if that was added to visitors. Of course, people want to do everything they can to obviously manage the risk, and having the vaccine is part of that. So I hope you're getting the nuance of what I'm saying there. I'm not encouraging people not to get the vaccine. I would be surprised if it was made a condition of entry.
I think it would be very difficult to hear a member from public health say that they weren't really encouraging people to take the precautions and consider boosting their immunity. And remembering, of course, that we're not just talking about the COVID vaccine, but we're also significantly talking about the flu vaccine. That's my own plug. Thanks, Ross. So Trevor, coming back to the essential care giver and this question around, you know, asking and then not getting really, and wanting to be part of that. Because one of the things that's always in my mind, Trevor, when I hear this, and, you know, we're all working to try and make it develop. There are many, many people that haven't got time. There are many people that as every month passes, when they still haven't been able to have that same connection, it's another month of not having a positive experience with somebody who may be towards the end of their days, end of life. And I'm not talking about end of life, because that's a whole different area in terms of end of life visits. But you know, but towards the end of those days, and I know how hard that is for many people. So this essential caregiver, what can people do, Trevor? Is there anything that they can do to make it happen?
To make it happen, it all starts from person-centered care. The individual is the center of the assessment, their individual circumstances, such as end of life. End of life care is deemed to be care to somebody that is not expected to live past a year. Far too many care homes are interpreting end of life care as the last weeks, days, and at its worst hours, we've heard. So it's all down to individual circumstances. Whether in regards to the time, how many people can be an essential caregiver, how long a certain essential caregiver should remain in, can remain in the service, can visit for, it's all down to the individual. What does that resident need to have a meaningful visit? There are so many, there's guidance. The guidance, as we know, is not mandatory. What is mandatory is legislation and law, regulation. So as Kim was saying, I was very interested to hear what Kim was saying about the changes to Regulation 9, as that would put things on a totally different footing as far as essential caregivers are concerned. So yeah, luckily you cut me off you stopped me from waffling before, Sonia. I'm going to try and stop myself and regulate myself this time. So the resources, there's resources, I put it in the chat box. There are resources that we've put together for people to have that discussion, has been pointed out, to have that rational discussion, that reasonable discussion about what is right for my mother, for my brother, for my friend, for my sister, for my aunt, for my uncle, for my granddad, for my grandma. What's reasonable? And yes, I'm waffling again. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Trevor. And again, I can only think how hard it must be to take calls from relatives day after day who are in those kind of circumstances. So on behalf of us all, as well as thanking our care providers and our colleagues here from the public sector and public health, I want to thank you as well for the work that you guys are doing. And sticking with that a moment, Kate, I'm going to bring you back in because Healthwatch is across Sussex. I never know what to say. Healthwatch in Sussex, I think it is, isn't it? So we've got West Sussex, we've got Brighton and Hove, and we've got East Sussex. Part of their job is to be on Team Public, isn't it? So equally, if there are issues to do with anything at all around people accessing health and social care sector, your colleagues there in Healthwatch across Sussex would be more than happy to hear from people direct and provide some kind of support for them. Is that correct, Kate?
Yeah, Sonia, well, it's about feedback and information and signposting to the right help. So we're not actual advocates for people, although this afternoon I'm working on something quite related to that. But it's so important that we gather that information and we can at least set them on the right path, especially I think sometimes people who are caring out of area as well, and they don't really know what the local landscape is or who the contact is.
And thank you for that. And Kat, I can see you. You always go to. Remember, I'm West Sussex, so you always go to the people that you know. I can see you down there, Kat, lurking in West Sussex. What happens next from today? Because we've got the great report, haven't we? And we will have some feedback from there, but we're going to keep reminding people, aren't we, that Healthwatch, like the carers organisations, and I'll bring my colleague Dan in a minute, but like the carers organisations, are here to help. We can only have your back. We can't really make it okay for you, but Kat, we can give people a bit of space, can't we, to talk about some of these things.
We can, and like yourselves in carer support, actually telling someone your experiences and your stories in itself is quite cathartic and helpful. But I think one of the advantages that we have in Healthwatch is we straddle health and social care. And we see things from all elements of the system, admittedly in a very generic sort of distance way. But sometimes that allows us to be the helicopter that flies across this and tries to make sense of where some of the interactions between health and social care sometimes fall a little apart. We also work with the Outstanding Society on supporting the whole care home market. So that's another resource that is available nationally. And we have some of our homes in West Sussex, and I'm sure other parts of Sussex, that are members of that and are keen to support other care homes. So if your particular care home isn't aware of that, then we can signpost to them, because they are making resources available. And we're particularly interested in Healthwatch in terms of how well care homes are communicating with their residents, because quite often it comes down to not the best communication. And where it's worked really well is where things like visiting policies have been co-designed with residents and their families and friend carers.
Thank you so much. And Dan, just to remind everybody that just as Healthwatch in Sussex is on Team Public, we're on Team Carer, aren't we? I mean, the point about you guys is that as far as we're concerned, you're unpaid carers. You are a significant part of what makes things work and happen for this whole economy, really. And we just want to remind people, don't we, Dan, that there are organisations both in Brighton and Hove and in East Sussex and in West Sussex that can help and to contact. That's right, isn't it, Dan?
Yes, 100%. So I guess the way I describe it is organisations like ourselves are there to support the carer and all carers involved in the situation. So we know, as much as we would refer to Healthwatch or other services, we are Team Carer. We do look at a lot of our stuff is about the individual and things that will help them, including grants, respite and stuff like that. But also in cases doing some research for them, whether that's your services or other services, to help them get their voice and feel more engaged and feel more heard. So we do work with everyone. It doesn't have to be the one sort of designated carer that some places have. It's sort of everyone in the family and in the situation or friends. And similarly, if we still help and support someone if they're cared for is in a long-term residential setting. So that makes no difference to us. Our focus is on the carer and supporting them. So, sorry, bear with me. Sorry about that. So, yeah, we are 100% Team Carer, as are the other organisations in B&H and East Sussex. Forgot where I was for a second. And we do the best to help the carers get where they are and what they need for themselves, and then encourage them to access your services and other services to fully get their voice heard and get out there. Missed anything, Sonia?
No, you're good. You're good. It's like oh look, here's the boss on the call. I better make sure. Just make sure you put that contact in again, Dan, so that and I noticed earlier on that you said that you were going to sort of like pull some of these things together, and I know Kat, that's something that Healthwatch do as well. So, you know, what have we heard before we go into the closed session? Well, you know, we've heard a lot today. We started off by saying that, you know, over 60% of us are still actually just concerned about visiting guidelines. You know, we thought it was going to be, you know, it's coming up to Christmas. We thought people would be thinking about going out, those kind of things. And actually, it's just generally about the visiting guidelines still, which is quite, you know, quite a big thing. We heard from Philippa about some of the big stuff, really, as well as her own personal experience. She reminded us about the white paper, reminded us about these things, reminded us that actually there are some big things happening in terms of change, and to keep present with that, and to keep actually articulating some of those issues to anybody who would listen, really. And remember that, you know, MPs are a really important part of that. And for those of you that live in Chichester, remember that we do actually have the Care Minister now, Gillian Keegan, in Chichester. So if you're a constituent there, sort of, you know, talk to her about some of the things that actually you've heard this evening and how that impacts you. Because that is where you get real change, through those stories and through that leverage. We've heard about where we're up to in terms of the workforce, and it got a bit scary at one point. But we did actually hear about some of the wider issues in terms of Sussex. And we've heard about some of the amazing work that our care home providers and public health have had to go through, and that idea of battling all these changes in terms of legislation and guidance at various times was, as we've said, dizzying. We've heard about what I was considering to be positive news, but Michael was saying maybe. We've heard about the over 90% of the workforce actually are vaccinated in terms of social care workforce. But we also heard from him in his area that they were predicting that 560 staff would be leaving as of tomorrow. It is actually. Is it tomorrow? Is it the 11th? It's the 11th. It's actually Armistice Day, which was, and so we've heard also from many carers through the chat box about frustrations, about sort of like what's reasonable, what's mandatory, why can't everybody do this the same, where's the consistency? And we've heard that so many times throughout this process. What I wanted to close with was something really just for you to ponder, and it's something that I have been pushing continuously through these conversations and sort of saying, you know, at some point, what I would like us to be able to get to is honouring some of the relationships that we haven't been able to have in the last couple of years. Some of us have lost people. Some of us have lost people not to COVID, but they've just been in care homes and now they're not. And we haven't been able to have that same kind of relationship as we'd have wanted to in this final 2 years of their life. Some of them we lost to COVID, and some people I know who are now going back in as essential caregivers or as visitors. They're going back in, and they're going back into different people and not the same person that they were when this started. And there is something about, for all of us, having a space to honour that and to think about that. So whether you think about that as you think about those we have lost later on this week, or whether there is something about us having a special place for people in Sussex and whether we can do something like that. But I really, really would value that idea of honouring those people. And I wanted to just say that for me, thank you so much. This has been hard. I did say at the beginning that there was a really good reason why we couldn't watch Ed Bowles last night in this house. And that's because we lost somebody, not to COVID, but they just died in a care home. But all that time in the visiting issues, all the problems, all that time beforehand, we weren't able to connect with her in the same way as what we would have wanted to and what we should have been able to. So I know how hard this is. Thank you so much to all of you who spent some time talking to us this evening. For those of you that want to stay, Dan and I will be delighted. For those of you that need to just go and have a little bit of comfort break, we'll still be here when you get back. But I want to thank, I'm not going to remember them all. I want to thank Kim, I want to thank Ross, I want to thank Vicky, I want to thank Anne, I want to thank Trevor, and I want to thank Kate, and I'm sure I've missed somebody, but thank you so much for sharing and being part of this evening. We'll wait until our colleagues leave. Thank you so much.